directed by Randy Livings and Robert Lundell Jr., who previously brought us the Christmas tapes. We are talking Conjuring Tapes. Now, I actually quite like the Christmas tapes. It was an anthology found footage movie, obviously based on Christmas. And here they have another anthology with found footage short films in a kind of framing device. So let's talk about it. What is the story? Well, it focuses on two female friends as they are sorting out like an apartment, and they find a box of VHS tapes and decide to play these, and each tape is a story. But the curious thing is that the people on these tapes are actually, well, some of the characters are actually these two women, but seemingly they don't remember ever doing anything like this, and they're going by different names, and each of these tapes represents a different kind of story. So we'll talk about the kind of the stories individually, and the kind of the wraparound story maybe towards the end. So the first kind of short film, if you like, is one called Ouija, and as the title suggests, it's about a group of four friends, two of which, as I say, are these two women who are watching this video, but sort of as different characters. And these four friends do a Ouija board. Inevitably, things kind of go wrong, and violent spirits answer the call. This one, I would suggest, is the most typical out of the kind of, if you would like consider a horror story. It very much has a beginning, middle and end, and is probably, as I say, the most traditional in the horror film. It has the most kind of overt horror imagery in regards to kind of possessed people, demonic images, and I would suggest is probably if you had to say it's the scariest, this will be the one. It has the old dark house, you know, ghoulish makeup, more overt kind of like supernatural shenanigans. I thought this one was quite a strong movie. I do think, if I had to have some critiques of this one, before we get to the scary elements, we have the kind of the normal sort of footage of these guys having this kind of Ouija party, I guess, and some of the kind of the characters are a little bit over the top, particularly one of the guys, but and arguably a little bit annoying. But I think once the kind of the horror starts, it actually is reasonable in regards to having a kind of a short, simple but effective kind of horror story. So that one I quite liked. The second one is one called Possession, and this one leans more comedic, and it once again has the it's got these two women again playing different characters, and then we get these stories about this kind of like paranormal investigator who's really only doing this for kind of clicks and online clout. He and his friend get called to deal with a possession, but they just think it's, you know, a load of old waffle, and inevitably there is someone who is possessed, but even the person who isn't possessed seems to be somewhat crazed and has a shotgun. The comedic element here is our main sort of character, this guy who's the host of this kind of podcast, has got diarrhea, so he's constantly sort of feeling ill, and we hear lots of kind of fart sounds and his stomach kind of churning and things like this, and he thinks it's just a kind of like a prank the whole time, and until obviously it isn't. So this one has this kind of comedic edge where this guy's nonchalantly just kind of like letting farts out and thinking it's just kind of like all a kind of a big joke. It's somewhat effective because I think it is actually kind of quite amusing. This guy has like no clue about what's going on, and even when he sees things, he just puts it down to people pranking him. So I thought that was kind of quite fun. And it's, you know, it has an interesting element where we have the possessed woman, but also the person that's called them also seems to be, you know, somewhat unhinged, having a kind of a shotgun. Ultimately, I think the story isn't quite as strong because it just sort of, I didn't really feel it amounted to a whole lot, but I thought the actual kind of our main character, this kind of guy, was kind of quite a fun character. Again, if you don't find toilet humour particularly funny, you might find the kind of the constant sort of fart gags and stuff like that maybe not to your taste. But you know, I thought the first two were fairly strong. The third one, I have to say, is probably the weakest out of the kind of shorter, well, the whole film really, if I'm honest. And this is about a therapist. Again, she is played by one of the actresses who are playing one of the people watching it. And she's dealing with this guy who has kind of some type of multiple personalities, including this Mr. Magpie character who is, you know, some scary dude. And he knows stuff about her past. I didn't really think this had much going on, to be honest with you. It's kind of just really two people talking in a room. It ends up being pretty typical, somewhat predictable, and ultimately you question how this woman is a psychologist. So there's that one, the weakest one, if you ask me. The fourth one is a little bit different because it doesn't really, because the premise is that these two people are watching VHS tapes, but the fourth one starts with like a lot of like YouTubers and stuff, kind of like talking about this religious cult. So it looks a lot more modern. Obviously, it's not on a videotape. It's a collection of, and I think this is like backers on this film. I think this movie was at least co-financed with Indiegogo. So I think this was probably a perk. So we have this collection of little snippets of different people talking about this Scientology-like cult. So it's a little jarring because I feel it doesn't kind of quite fit in with the rest of the setup here about these two women watching these videotapes, because this is a collection of reactions to a cult which they're obviously done online, and then we kind of go into the sort of story of the fourth one, which is these. Again, some type of online show where, again, one of the characters is played by one of the same actresses that does one of the characters who are watching these videos, and they're investigating this cult, and they try and go in and to find out what's kind of going on, and obviously bite off more than they can chew. Again, this one it's quite an interesting sort of story, and it is a little bit of an examination on, I would suggest, certainly that the religious aspects that you have, certainly in US culture, and how persuasive they might be, you might say. And obviously it's directly referencing, you know, David Koresh kind of style religious cults and things like that. And an interesting idea. I don't think it really explored the concept, because you don't really know what is actually kind of going on, I would suggest. Certainly as the movie sort of comes to its conclusion, you feel, okay, there's some twists here, and it's certainly an interesting idea, and I think the kind of the setup, although it doesn't fit with the kind of the rest of the movie, it is interesting, but then the conclusion of it, I was like, okay, what's going on? You know, I don't think it really does a good enough job of landing, this is the story. It just kind of goes, here's a shocking ending, and does it make sense? And then let's talk about the kind of the story as a whole, the framing device. These two women, I found it quite, again, it's quite an interesting setup, but the payoff I felt wasn't particularly strong. So the setup is there's these two women sorting out this apartment of a friend of theirs, I think it is, and they're watching these tapes and they see, hang on a second, that looks like me, you know. And then they keep watching these tapes. Good idea. My issue is that when they see, you know, think about it logically. You see yourself or someone who looks exactly like you on these tapes, you would freak out. And they don't. They just kind of like watch another one and watch another one. And each of these tapes has got at least one of them having this doppelganger that looks exactly like them on these tapes. They just don't really seem to react, to be honest. And then the end seems to tie in with a kind of the last sort of story, and it's some sort of like otherworldly force. And I won't tell you what happens at the end, but again, it's just like spooky stuff. Doesn't really know what it means. Spooky stuff. So I felt this movie was a little unsatisfying, but it had some really good ideas. And there are some elements that I do think well. So this is a real mixed bag for me, this movie. I don't think it's as strong as the Christmas tapes, if I'm honest. This one felt like the ideas here were somewhat half-baked, but it still has some interesting stuff kind of going on. And at least a couple of the kind of the short films, I would say, you know, are interesting, or even 3 of them. But again, they're just not quite, they're not quite done, if you ask me. Only the first movie, to me, the first short film, I felt was a fully cohesive movie. All the rest of them, I felt were missing elements. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. It's not a bad movie, considering it's obviously very low budget. Again, why did this sort of, the final movie seem so different from the rest? It clearly wasn't like a VHS movie. It was like a modern online one. They clearly had to kind of like, you know, factor these people in that have probably helped finance this into creating this, and it seems like that's been sort of like put in for that reason and that reason only. I don't think it particularly served the story because it was at odds with the rest of it. Anyway, there you go. 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? Would you see it based on what I've told you? Please let me know what your thoughts are, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.